Maybe in the interest of time, let's get started, because I know that many of you have agendas of trains and planes to go. Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation, SFDR. Do you remember when you heard those 4 letters for the first time? For most of us, it was probably in 2019, at the time when the first proposal of the regulation was issued, following the publication the earlier year, 2018, of the EU taxonomy regulation. And I don't know for you, but to be honest, it took me a few months to get those letters right. And I was not the only one. I think I can assume that globally, as a sector, and for our sector, this came as a big surprise. But let me take you a quick step back. From its very beginnings, over 40 years ago, microfinance came bearing a dual promise to attain both financial and social results. The awareness that we needed to develop transparent evaluation and disclosure on our social and environmental promise had been part of our industry's DNA since inception. SPTF was set up almost 20 years ago in 2005 with exactly this promise, or with exactly this objective, to coordinate the global microfinance sector and develop a common language, meaning standards and methodology for transparency in social and environmental performance management and reporting. But uptake and implementation of all our work to describe our social and environmental achievements had always been voluntary. And so we were always confronted with very diverse levels of commitment to align and implement standard taxonomies and methodologies for transparent evaluation across our sector. And then, in the transformative year of 2019, a seismic shift occurred: the advent of a European-wide regulation, SFDR, and an EC taxonomy designed to clarify the concepts. Regulation applicable to the global financial sector for better transparency. That's exactly what we needed. And therefore, even though our industry did not easily find its place in the regulation we discovered, yes, our sector embraced and adhered broadly to the proposal of SFDR. As a sector, we could have pleaded that SFDR does not apply to our world. And I'm sure that many here in this room will agree that it was our first intuition. But this is not what we did. Investors took up the challenge. And as the global industry network managing coordination and cooperation of the sector, CERIS and SPTF provided the platform for a sector-wide coordination to make SFDR work. In countless webinars and endless hours of workshops, volunteers from our investor and fund manager community worked together to make SFDR become what it was intended to be. Not a simple compliance framework, checking the box of a regulatory request, but to increase understanding and transparency on the evaluation of environmental and social impacts of the financial sector. These 2 years of intense work allowed to achieve very concrete results and proposals, and we will hear more about this later in our discussion. I said earlier, volunteers, and I want to seize this opportunity to express a big thank you and profound gratitude to the many organizations and their representatives who continuously volunteer to contribute to such a sector project of coordination, making the time available for to work for the benefit of the full sector. Without your commitment and investment of time, we would not have achieved where we stand today. As we continue to work on the implementation of SFDR, another surprise came in September with the launch of a large, direct and public consultation by the European Commission for a global review of this regulation. This is a window of opportunity to address our challenges and propose adaptation in the future regulation. And we, again, are very intensely involved in preparing a clear and coordinated sector input into this consultation. But let me stop here. In this closing plenary of a very intense and productive European Microfinance Week 2023, we have the privilege of the presence of a great panel that covers the complete value chain of our industry. So we can hear directly from the practitioners on how the introduction of this European regulation was perceived and implemented at the various levels of activity and responsibility of our industry. So let me present to you my panel, and I'll sit next to them for the rest of it. To my left, as I said, the three levels of this industry. To my left, the national regulator, CSSF, represented by Laura Kelkopf, ESG coordinator. Next to her, a leading European fund manager falling under SFDR regulation, Symbiotics, represented by Emmanuel Javois, head of blended finance and sustainability. And as a very important and valued voice of the Global South, David Nijiru, Chief Business Officer at MFI, Juhudi Kilimo from Kenya. May I start with the first question to you, Emmanuel? Can you tell us in a few words how you, as a Europe-based investor, mainly investing in the Global South, experienced the arrival of SFDR and how you approached this in your organization?
Yeah, so I think the first piece was that I think, as you said, it was a lot to digest initially and a lot to clarify because it was difficult for us to understand exactly what our obligations were. So we spent actually a lot of time in the first few months, and I would say almost a year, I think, just to try and figure out what exactly the requirements would be. And this, I guess, was also made a little bit more complicated by the fact that, some of the deadlines were pushed, some of the documentation that were clarifying. So the regulatory technical standards were issued a bit later than initially anticipated. So there was a lot of things like that that created a lot of uncertainty on exactly what the rules were. First of all, our adoption of the jargon, adaptation to it, plus just, again, the fact of seeing new documents coming in regularly, deadlines being pushed, and us having to digest, more and more documentation as they were coming. So that was creating uncertainty. And so obviously for us as an organization, that was not necessarily easy, but obviously, we are part of a value chain. And so there are a piece of the value chain that is not here, which is our investors. So the ones that are actually investing in the funds that Symbiotics manages, and they were very, eager to understand exactly how we would implement this regulation, whether there was any risk of compliance for them, whether there was any things that they needed to be aware of, etc. And so at the same time as we were trying to figure out what to do, we also had to try and, reassure them that we were going to be fine, which, sometimes was a little bit of a stretch to do both at the same time. So that aside, I think overall, we do see this as a super positive thing for the sector. I mean, we have, as impact investors, been working on disclosing as much as we can our impacts, working as much as possible to filter investments that have the greatest likelihood to have a positive impact and the least likelihood to have a negative impact. So I think all that we've done and be able to demonstrate that in a broader way and in a better way is just, a great opportunity. And the idea that this becomes mandatory for as many funds as possible is, I think, something we look forward to. And in terms of what we've done, because I think you wanted us to also capture that.
How you approach the topic, what you did.
Yeah. So I think generally speaking, what we've had to do in order to really be able to comply, even though we had all those things that we already were doing for many, many years, for 15 years, the fact of having quite a strong attention being given by SFDR on the environmental risks and the environmental performance definitely led us to develop further something that we had not left aside, but definitely seen as something less important than the social aspect of our work. And so I think it was something very important for us to so we revamped our ESG rating in order to, beef up the environmental piece, understanding better the environmental risks of our investments, being able to engage more with our investees on those points, measure the risk economic sector by economic sector. And that has been work that we've done together with the other SPTF members to agree on, what is the economic sector classification that we ask our investees to report on to allow us to have a better risk assessment. We've done actually a revamp also of a SDG classification methodology, so to be sure that it's actually auditable, traced in our system in a better way, and because it's the basis for us to report on SFDR and on our sustainable investment objective. So a lot of things were done. And I have to say the other piece is a lot more attention of all our investors on those data points. You could think that people that invest in impact funds always are super interested by any impact information that you provide to them. But I have to say that this regulation actually made us have interactions with many more people within our investor community. So the risk people, the legal people, etc. Not only just the, some people that were interested in it. So, and I think this is good. More attention on those data points.
Thanks, Emmanuel. Laura, to you, as the national regulator of Luxembourg, you have the delicate position of balancing regulatory developments that come from the European Commission and the diverse particularities of the financial sector and the actors in Luxembourg. How did the CSSF approach the launch of the regulation and its transition into Luxembourg law?
I think what happened when this came into fruition was, first, we had to recognize the specific characteristic of the new framework. It goes beyond regulatory compliance, and there's a specific objective to that framework, which, obviously is to also mobilize funds towards investments that are more sustainable. And it was also clear that for Luxembourg, as a financial center, there was an opportunity there, and that we had a key role to play in that respect. And sort of for the CSSF, it meant that as the regulator, we had to sort of lead and guide actors in the implementation of the framework. And it was one of our priorities was to accompany the sector in that implementation. We had also the same difficulties that were encountered by the market, which you mentioned already, which were the regulatory pace, the very speedy calendar, and the fact that it wasn't always clear what the requirements were, and we were having to clarify those requirements at the same time as we were having to ensure and guide the industry with the implementation of those same requirements. So in order to address that, we designed an approach which was centered around support and guidance, as I said, risk-based supervision, which is something we've also have an approach that we also have for other sectors. And then a lot of awareness raising and education. Mm-hmm. I think, as a matter of fact, we still have some elements that need to be clarified today. I think we will discuss this also later. But there was a big focus on upskilling. I think you touched upon that also in your answer, is that investors, all the market players had to upskill and educate themselves as to not only how to comply with the requirements, but also what is the data that they are going to receive from those requirements, what does it mean, and how to use it effectively. So it was very much learning by doing, and it still is. On our side, even internally for the CSSF, we also developed an upskilling training program, and we've integrated sustainable finance in our general education program. And of course, there is also a big part of this education and upskilling, which stems from dialogue at European level with other NCAs, with ESMA, so that's the European supervisor. Because in Luxembourg, we also, because of our central role in the financial sector, and the fact that we're very international, we always advocate for a lot of harmonization, because it doesn't make sense to have a Luxembourg local interpretation if that is not widely spread across Europe, because we have funds, notably here, who use a passport to be distributed amongst all the European countries. And so what we do is, as a CSSF, we take part in those forums, a lot, and we try to engage with other NCAs to ensure that we have a harmonized approach.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, how would you assess the current efforts? You answered it partially already, but I'd love to go a bit more. How would you assess the current efforts of the funds and asset manager industry to comply with the reporting? And in what areas is feedback from the fund industry helpful for the CSSF? Maybe in other words, what areas would you as a regulator like the asset managers of funds to be more proactive in suggesting approaches and solution and implementation?
Well, the thing is, as I mentioned before, we're still very much in the heart of operationalizing and implementing the framework and making sure that the framework is usable. And I mean, in that sense, the way the framework was initiated is that it's disclosure centric. You mentioned SFDR, it's supposed to be a disclosure regulation. But the idea is that once we have those disclosure, once we have this information, this will help investors make the right decision or informed decision. And from that, we will manage to sort of redirect the funds, right? So it's not just about getting the data. I mean, we hear a lot about how it's still a challenge to collect data and having the right data. But there is also a necessary pendant, which is not just having the data, but also integrating all sustainability factors in your investment process, in your investment decision, in your governance. So there is a big part of expectations as a regulator, which is this incorporation of sustainability into the governance of the entities. We want them to systematically incorporate ESG factors into the decision. And I mean, again, it's learning by doing. So when I said that our approach was very much focused on guidance and exchanges with the industry, we tried to guide the industry on these aspects by doing last year and this year a lot of what we call self-assessment exercises, which we engage on a bilateral basis with the entities where we were asking them to self-assess, and then we had an exchange of where are you compared to what our expectations are. And that is a very important aspect of how we approach the implementation of the framework. It means that all the market players, they have to understand that they also have their own responsibility, and that regardless of their role in the investment value chain, and regardless of whether everything is always clear from a regulatory perspective, they have their own input, they have their own responsibility to assess and make sure that sustainability factors are integrated in their process. And now we also put the message out there that it's not acceptable anymore to have a wait and see approach. We hear a lot about the difficulty to collect data, the fact that some points of the regulatory framework are not clear. which we're happy to acknowledge, and we understand that. But waiting for an improvement of the framework is not going to be enough in terms of addressing the urgency and the climate crisis.
Thank you, Laura. And we'll come back to that. I think later on. I'd love to pass it now to David. When did you hear about SFDR for the first time, and what was your reaction?
Thank you again. The first time I heard about the SFDRs, I think it was 2020, 2021. More specific, I think 2020, because of my role as the head of impact in Juhudi Kilimo. And this was courtesy of the many demands that we're getting from our funders in terms of reports. And they would give us many templates just to fill. Each one of them had their own version. Even up to today, I think we get different templates from different funders, from different investors. The first reaction to us was a lot more work for us. We didn't know how to handle some of those aspects in the report, especially in the Excels that they were asking for us to fill. We didn't have that data. We were not, our MIS was not aligned. So our reaction was, how do we handle this? How do we now satisfy the requirements of our funders? Yeah.
And you mean specifically after the launch of SFDR? Because I mean, you always had to do a lot of reporting to a variety of investors. And my question is, did you see a specific difference in reporting requirements that came to you as an MFI following that regulation of?
Yes, I would say we saw a change in the report, what they're demanding us to include in the report. Yeah. So, and when we inquired, we had its new regulations. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Emmanuel, back to you. You personally and Symbiotics as an organization have taken a very hands-on and proactive approach to make SFDR work. Can you tell us a bit more about the main positive changes that the introduction of SFDR has brought to you as an organization? And to also come back to what you just said, Laura, about the importance of learning by doing, how did you experience the push for coordination and cooperation of the fund and investor community and the role that Services SPTF could play in that?
Yeah, so on the things that we've upgraded and seen as positive really is, so the things that I mentioned earlier of, we have, I think now, a much better tool to assess the environmental risks of all our investments, including the microfinance investments, where again, we had pushed that a little bit on the side, considering that this was not key. And I think we've tried at least to have a balanced approach. When I hear David, I'm thinking, oh, maybe not. But okay, I think at least in all cases that makes us be better tooled also to invest in other sectors than microfinance, where I think the risks in terms of environment are also potentially higher. So I think in that sense for us, that was good. And again, this whole thing around, when we had to define our sustainable investment objectives for each of the funds, and actually Symbiotics has this model that is very specific, where we manage actually 25 different funds. So you multiply the problem by a lot each time you have to discuss those things. Anyway, so we chose to go for the framework of the SDGs. And again, we had something where we were tagging some of our investments to different SDGs, but it was something, again, that was not completely artistic, but had a bit of that. And so again, we made that a lot more scientific, I want to say, or at least we have very clear rules. And again, in the system, it's tracked why we've tagged each investment with that kind of SDG. We've gone at the SDG target level to be as precise as possible, to have justification that are very as bulletproof as we can, to say, okay, this is the SDG that we contribute to, and to have that auditable, because we do get a lot of questions actually from auditors also on this piece. And I feel that is actually quite positive. We have that in the system. It's now better done. So that has been for us super helpful. And we actually developed interactions with the JIM, the Joint Impact Model, to have proxy calculations for the greenhouse gas emissions, which we didn't have before. I have to say, I'm not sure we're yet at the level where we're really using this information very profoundly. We are using a lot the economic sector classification that we've asked and expanded. I think that's been very useful to have more detailed conversations with the investees on exactly what kind of investments are they making. The number of GHG emission right now is one that we are looking at, trying to figure out what exactly this tells us about the footprint of our investments and trying to engage. So, but that's a a progress. I think a lot of investors we had a meeting this morning about SFDR, and a lot of us are thinking, okay, how can we really use this information in a meaningful way? It's not yet clear, but I think it's still useful to have it. I'm in that front. And again, so all that has been positive, and in that whole, change, all those changes, I think it's been extremely useful, and I've pushed a lot for it to have SPTF and Cerise as partners and as a forum for us to discuss. I think it was really very challenging, all those, figuring out. I think we're always a little bit more intelligence with more brains in the room. So, we had a lot of different angles being representative. SPTF, Cerise Investor Working Group is a quite amazing group of people that are very willing to share and work together to try and better understand. And I think we also the value that there is in aligning as much as we can. I mean, we're normally doing quite a lot of us the same kind of investments. At least we have a lot of shared investments. And I think it made sense for us to try and be as aligned as possible on how we interpret the regulation, even if it's difficult. We didn't fully, I think, reach the point where we have a completely aligned interpretation, but I think at least we know where the differences in interpretation lie, which is already super important. And we're a very tiny sector. I mean, Article 9 is only 3 to 4% of the all funds, and us within that is yet another fraction. So if we cannot give a unified message, I think it's also a reputation risk for us. So I think it was very important, and again, gave us a lot of energy and strength. And the final thing that I wanted to say here is that, it allowed us to split the work. And I think hearing you again, I feel we've not fully reached that goal, but I think one of the goals was to try and make sure that we don't send tons of different templates to you. I think that is not fully there yet. But again, I think it's been this process of we rushed to try and comply with some deadlines before we were able to coordinate. And I think we're hopefully in the future, we'll gradually get to that more aligned version, I hope, for you and for us.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And I fully agree, of course, here in Luxembourg, the SPTF office is in charge of this investor coordination. And I could really observe that energy. I would say in the beginning, there was a lot of our members really thought that we could manage that individually. And I think the more we understood what it really meant, the awareness increased that this is something where we need to work together. And I was really amazing. I tried to say that in the beginning, in the introductory words. It was amazing to see the energy that everybody put together. It's also a learning process for the industry to see that as competing investors, we have more to win by bringing more brains into the same room and finding answers to the challenges that come with this kind of proposal. I'd like to have a short follow-up question to you, Emmanuel. Tools and knowledge of methodologies to collect reliable and meaningful data, you mentioned that already with the Jim, are still missing. In your view, should investors be developing these tools and methodologies? Is it appropriate to leave it to the market and commercial parties? And as a follow-up, how does this impact the overhead and operational costs for the investor, but of course also somehow to the MFI who are carrying these costs ultimately?
So whether we should, as investors, be the ones designing the tools, you say?
Yeah.
Well, I do feel we're the nexus that there is in this SPTF and Cerise network, I think is quite key, because we've tried again as much as possible to agree on the key questions that needed to be added typically to the SPI 4 and SPI 5 questionnaires to be able to cover all the things that the regulation asks us to cover or at least all the ones that we think are possible to cover, of the ones that we are asked to cover, because I think there's a piece where we have to acknowledge in our disclosures that some things are not possible. And I think that's, if I understand correctly, also fine, let's say, to say when we have data limitations and that it's not reasonable for us to collect some data points. So I think we're trying to, for the investors, or at least the asset managers, to decipher what the regulation asks us, put together some sort of template, and have then, some investees try it out and see if it's manageable to fill in, manageable to respond. I think SPTF Stories is there a very good platform for us to do that together, rather than just have one person sitting in one room, not having the contact with the end investees do that. So I do feel that's the right place. There we still have quite a few things to work on. There is, a lot of work on the whole biodiversity sensitive areas, where it's not that easy for us yet, or for, I think, you to make sure that we're able to answer to that question of, are we harming potentially biodiversity sensitive areas or not, indirectly through our work, and other topics. On the cost estimation, are you asking me for a number, a figure of how much it cost us?
No, it's probably a bit too early, but I mean, globally, you might have, I guess you have an idea. We see how much time in terms of hours and work days we are already spending in the different working groups and sub-working groups, and many who participated very actively are sitting here in this room. So we know what it means.
So yes, it has been an enormous setup cost for sure. And yeah, I think it's in the range of a team of 3 to 4 persons, half time for probably 1 or 2 years, depending on how you want to do the estimation, and then you can do the math. It's really a huge amount of work for the setup cost. And then in the ongoing cost, definitely that's a few more questions in each of the due diligence, that's a few more data points to put in the database. So hopefully that ongoing cost is a little bit, at least on the analysis part, of not too high, because we've tried to integrate it in our usual systems. Obviously, we do have one more publication of one more annex, and which is actually quite long. So there is quite a bit more work on the reporting side to the investors, and that will stay. We also see this as something where we've done quite a bit of work to create a template for this year, and then we hope to be able to reproduce that for the next years, unless there is a complete overhaul of the regulation. That's where indeed I think our heart broke when we saw the consultation and the depth of the questions that was put by the Commission on opening all doors for all changes, when we were just, we had just filed all the annexes for our financial statements. We were so happy and relieved, and everybody was leaving on holidays, in July, August, and then you come back and boom, you think, okay, maybe we have to revamp everything in a year or two. And yes, that gave us a heart attack, I have to say, for several of us. We'll see what comes out of that consultation. I think in the end, again, through the energy of the group, we see this as an occasion for us to maybe, make our voice heard on what has been positive in that regulation, how it can be improved, what are the challenges. And hopefully it's not that we break everything we've done and we start from scratch. If that happens, I have to say, my discussion with the management will be a tough one to explain how we spent that much energy on something that gets destroyed a year or two later, but that's another story. Anyway, so yeah. I think that's the cost piece.
Yeah, and that brings me to my next question, which I wanted to address to Laura. In September, we heard that the European Union announces this public consultation on the regulation to assess potential shortcomings, focusing on legal certainty, on usability of the regulation, its capacity to play its part in tackling greenwashing. How do you, as the regulator, interpret this announcement, and what does it concretely mean for the CSSF in terms of supervision of the sector in Luxembourg in the meantime?
Yes, I hear what you're saying. We also hear a lot of feedback about how the current framework has a lot of pitfalls, and it has a lot of inconsistencies, and a lot of things that are required in that framework is not conducive to its purpose. Here we're talking about disclosures, and we're talking about we have a perspective of the investment value chain. We shouldn't also forget retail investors. They also need to understand the products that they invest in. And we hear a lot of feedbacks that all these disclosures are not necessarily helpful or conducive to that. So I understand what you mean in terms of efforts involved. It's a positive thing that the European Commission has acknowledged that the framework as it stands need to be improved on. I think the point is to address the challenges that the industry is seeing in the current implementation. What does it mean in the meantime? As I said, is in any case, you can't wait and see. You can't really, I don't think the efforts that you've put into this so far are going to be lost. It's in any case, it's something you will be able to leverage on. I honestly think you'll be able to leverage on those efforts. And, it's not an option to say, we'll wait and see until possibly this new version of the framework. And it's not only, well, I mean, it's a SFDR targeted consultation, but there's implication in other regulation that could also possibly evolve, but we don't know when. So, I mean, what it means for us in the meantime is that we keep the efforts that we have engaged. We don't get discouraged, possibly. We continue working on the integration of sustainability factors. I think I understand what you mean about collecting the data, but again, if you integrate the sustainability factor in your governance process, in your investment decision, if you try to upskill your employees about what the data actually means, that's never going to be lost.
Thank you. Yeah. And maybe just as a small follow-up, in this revision, do you expect more alignment on one hand with other regulations, but also internationally? Or is that too early to
is that a question for me?
Yeah.
Yeah, so as I said, again, harmonization, it's really important. It's not so much about what we expect as regulator. I mean, of course, we expect entities to be compliant, but it's also, again, what is conclusive to the purpose. And it's that, in that sense, harmonization in the area of sustainability that's really important, whether at European level or international level. And we see, I mean, there is ongoing work at the moment to ensure this international alignment, or try to ensure the international alignment, and that entities that are subject to European reporting requirement, that they can leverage on that also at international level. But of course, it's going to be challenging to implement a standardized disclosure, because there's always an element of customization that might be required depending on different geopolitical factors. So I'm not a specialist of this specifically, but I understand how this can be difficult to achieve. But in any case, even if we wait for the new framework or the improvement of the framework, if we wait for the harmonization of the standards at an international level, we can't expect that the regulators or the legislator are going to come forward and deliver a one-size-fits-all sustainable path. So from my perspective, it's always going to be ongoing work, which is why I think also the wait-and-see approach is not viable.
Yeah, exactly. And I've just listened a little bit in the previous session, which was about labeling and regulation. And it was clearly mentioned that, I think for the impact sector, that came as a shock, because the impact sector had already worked so much on those issues. It was what happened with the regulation that it suddenly entered obligations, I would say, for the large rest of the financial market. And I think so what the positive changes that we clearly already see from the regulation is that it has achieved alignment and transparency in evaluation. And what we also clearly see is that the introduction of regulation has brought the issue into the boardroom of organizations, and it becomes a serious topic. I would now like to broaden a bit our discussion to a more sensitive topic or aspect that I find has not always or has not yet received the full attention and critical interrogation that it deserves, and which I would like to call proportionality. Africa comprises 70% of the world's population, yet the continent contributes just 4% of global carbon emissions. While European countries have turned massively to coal and fossil in the aftermath of the Ukraine war, while many Western European governments are accelerating their ambitious agendas for environment, facing increasing opposition also in election years in 2024, our industry has spent a big effort to think about how we can implement a new regulation and measure indicators such as CO2 emissions for farmers in Africa, toxic wastes of our retail clients in Asia, etc., etc. But are we really addressing the challenge, environmental damage and degradation, by putting all this pressure on the global south? In the opening plenary that I guess many have listened to, Marion Allais, who is the director of environment at Cerise, raised the question and said, current regulation is requesting, among others, that we calculate CO2 emissions, but this does not really address the environmental issue. The vulnerable populations are not the ones who are responsible for climate change. Now, based on that statement from our beginning session, I would like to pass that question to you, David. Yeah. What do you see as the main benefits, but also the main challenges of this development in reporting?
Thank you. First of all, the main benefit of the regulations to us as an institution, as Juhudi Kilimo and customers, is that, first of all, it helps us to align our operations, to sustainability, so that we are not engaging in practices or products and services that may harm customers, that may harm the environment. So again, that helps us a great deal to ensure that we have products that really are responsible to the environment, to the customers, and it's a good one. And like us at Juhudi Kilimo, that aligns very well with our social and environmental performance management policy, because we have a policy on that. So to a great extent, that's very positive. But again, if you look at the microfinance institutions, basically they are trying to serve people at the bottom of the pyramid. These are poor people. Their key objective basically is to have food on the table, and I believe also poverty greatly, contributes to, damage the environment, So these people, as a financial institution, we are more focused on serving them, giving products that possibly help them to increase their incomes. In agriculture, as we serve most of our customers, like in Juhudi Kilimo, over 80% of our customers are rural smallholder farmers. So we are really more focused on giving them products that help them to mitigate on climate change, because in East Africa, for example, in Africa, we are really affected by climate change. So we are more focused on giving them, products for adaptation, products for building resilience in their farming, and all that. So when it comes now to the issue of reporting and gathering data, as an institution, first of all, like I said earlier, we were a bit shocked, because you look at what our funders, who are basically from Europe, but our shareholders, what they're asking for and what we are pursuing on the ground. First of all, there is a bit of a mismatch, because we are really trying to serve the customers and improve their livelihoods. We don't mind, like she said, reporting on the based on the sectors that we are serving, reporting based on the purpose for which the customers are, are borrowing the loans. But now when it comes, for example, to reporting on greenhouse gases emissions, for us, we are really at a loss, because how do we first of all, we don't have the capacity, we don't have the systems even to report on that. Carbon footprints, we really, as an institution, we don't have that capacity at all. So it becomes quite a challenge to us to report on such an aspect. Even for our customers, like you say, the toxic waste emissions, how do we, follow up that? We require really to have a lot of capacity to be able to do that. So post-play, I don't know, our funders, our partners, I don't know what role, they have maybe post-play to incentivize or even post-play to, to support financial institutions like microfinance institutions to build capacity, maybe possibly in future to be able to do that. But for the time, it's really a big challenge, because at some point, even as a talk here, there are templates that maybe possibly you may need to allocate resources within the institution. You need to align your MIS. Those are huge capital investments that the institution requires, in terms of human resource and also systems to be able to track some of these things. Yeah, it's a big challenge, but I don't know, what the regulator and the investors maybe need to do to support, especially the institutions, the group of some. Because again, looking at it, like you said, in terms of proportionality, I mean, how, you look at the bigger picture, what we are trying to do versus the requirement of the reporting. So you'll find that possibly this requirement to report on this areas is very disproportionate to the bigger picture, to what we are trying to do as an institution. So I don't know who now comes in to support this extra thing that we must do, and not because it's to really fit into our business. It's because really there is a regulation, and by extension, from the regulator now to the investors, now we have to do it at the institutional level.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, please, Simona. Of course.
So, so I think, there are many aspects I feel to that to that question. I fully feel indeed for you on the total impossibility, I guess, to answer to those questions directly. I think for me it raises a few remarks, at least. I think one thing that is relatively clear, maybe not crystal clear in the regulation, and I think this will be one of our comments in the consultation, is to say, make it crystal clear that indeed, when it comes to measuring principal adverse impacts, because all those things that you've had to answer is about that reporting on principal adverse impacts of the investments, that for these we can use proxies, and I think that's already in the regulation, but it's not as if it was crystal clear, and so I think it was not necessarily always felt to be comfortable. But typically at Symbiotics, we've used the approach of saying, for greenhouse gas emissions, we ask you for a quite detailed economic sector breakdown of your portfolio, and then we deal with the calculations with a joint impact model, with the idea that I think the ultimate vision is that you could actually maybe enter yourself this data in the joint impact model to get the output yourself, which can be useful in terms of those proxy calculations. They have their pros and their cons, but at least it's relatively simple and painless. I would say, I mean, not painless, but it's okay. It doesn't take the development of a super huge MIS. So I think that's one thing to clarify in the regulation, that this is fine as an approach. And I think we at least believe this is fine. And this is reasonable in terms of effort. Then clarifying also the fact that we can report on the PAIs that are material for given the sectors in which we invest, and typically all those things related to exposure to hazardous wastes, emissions to water, etc. Those are things that we at least have made the assessment that we felt it was not sufficiently material, given the kind of investments that we were making, to actually develop something to measure the tons of emissions to water of bad chemicals or whatever. So we've actually not worked on this, and we've not asked the institutions to report on that figure. And the only thing we did was to report in our documentation, first of all, why we cannot do that, why we felt it was difficult, why we felt it was not super relevant given the kind of sectors in which we were investing. And finally, we have put some information in our disclosures, which is the amount of our portfolio, which indirectly is exposed to that risk, meaning that we've taken and gathered all the data from all the different investees on their sector investments and in which sectors they have borrowers. And we've taken the sectors that are with some risks of emitting polluting waters. And we've just responded, yes, we have 3, 4, 5% of our portfolio that indirectly is exposed to that risk. And we believe that we are not posing a huge threat, and hence we're not giving emissions to water in tons of emissions, because we're not able to do that, and our investees are not able to calculate them. So that has been our approach, and I feel, we'll try to ask for a clarification that kind of approach is fine, because if we have a materiality assessment, and if we say that if we invest in sectors that are not super likely to be high polluters, maybe it's not worth developing a whole bazang super complicated thing to try and answer to that question. And I think the final piece for me that would be one of the key things that we'll try to ask for in that consultation is also to say that we believe that reporting on principal adverse impacts, and typically on all those indicators, is one thing that should be asked from all the funds, whether or not they have claims of sustainability, and especially on the ones that don't have any claims of doing good. We do believe that having greenhouse gas emissions for the ones that have high investments in potentially polluting, potentially emitting sectors would be the key for all the investors to actually direct their investments to the more interesting ones. So that's one thing that I think we'll say in our responses to the consultation is make it manageable for us to respond to what we think is material for us. And again, happy to do some calculations on greenhouse gas emissions, but also ask that same calculation from every single fund.
Maybe, Emmanuel, maybe just to clarify, we still, yes, maybe symbiotics, for example, maybe may not require those aspects of greenhouse emissions reporting or data from us, but I've seen other funders.
I know.
Because up to now, we still have different templates coming from different funders and different partners. So I think we still have, people requesting for different information, sometimes very challenging to a small microfinance institution, very, very challenging.
Yeah. And I know, and again, I think it's because the regulation was sufficiently difficult to interpret that it's been difficult for everyone to be sure that having an approach where we don't report on every single indicator or where we use proxies is fine. And so hence, in the absence of that clarification, some people just thought that the only solution was to ask you.
Yeah.
And I think we, again, for the regulator to clarify this would be extremely useful to make sure that, again, we put on you a burden that is the reasonable one, and the one that makes sense, again, for investors in the end to have the right information to make the right decisions. Ultimately, I think that's what we want.
Yeah, I see both of you looking at me, but I don't represent the European Commission. I'm not sure what they're going to decide. What I can tell you from what I'm hearing is, first, the fact that you're able to sort of address those points is because you started learning by doing. So you have key messages now. So I think that's, if you hadn't, then you wouldn't have those messages to sort of put forward in the SFDR consultation. So just to underline why it's important to learn by doing. And then, I can't anticipate what the European Commission is going to get out of that consultation. I know there's already some consideration for materiality aspects, and it's an approach that's been retained by the European Commission on a different piece of legislation, which is the CSRD. So they've actually retained that approach, and they said under CSRD, which requires you to report on a number of data points, you have the responsibility to make that materiality assessment. So it's just to say it's not an approach that is unknown to the European Commission. And they've also recently came out with a work plan, and in that work plan there was next to the work plan they published a set of sort of, I'm not sure the term is recommendation, I'm not sure what the exact term is, but they said that one of the aims of that they wanted to achieve was also to alleviate reporting burden. So, I mean, we can be hopeful in that sense that you know, they will take this into account when they compile the results of the SFDR consultation. But that's all I can say at this stage. Again, I'm not a representative of the European Commission, and I don't have a crystal ball where I can see the future. I wish I did.
Yeah. And the answer is in 2025 or 2026, as far as we understand. So we'll have to be a bit patient. That's what I understand. Is that the time it will take for this?
There's always a process, so it's always a long-term thing. But the timing to answer to the consultation for those interested is until the 15th of December. So yeah, we'll see.
And as you mentioned, there will be probably a huge amount of inputs into that consultation. Yes. So it's even more important for us as a sector. And I mean, as we said before, we have started that internally within the microfinance sector, but also beyond with the GIN and the larger impact networks, to make sure that we identify which are the key challenges and we address them clearly, because in that mass of information that the Commission will get, we need to make sure that those key messages are received at the other end. So, yeah. I mean, one of the questions that I was wondering, I mean, we speak a lot about emission indicators, CO2, water, etc. For you as an MFI on the ground, what are other environmental indicators that would be more relevant for you, for your clients? I don't know, deforestation, other aspects which so far are not, I mean, are there environmental aspects that you are maybe already collecting because they're of importance for you in your assessment?
Thank you. For us as a country, like for example in Kenya on Monday we are planting trees, the whole country. Yeah, so we also at Juhudi Kilimo as a financial institution, we have a dashboard. We have targets per year of trees that we must support among our customers, among the communities that we work with. Above that, again, we have the green energy products. In Kenya, again, we have, like in my institution, Juhudi Kilimo, again, we measure how many customers, because 70% of our customers are women. For example, we measure how many households we have given energy-saving cook stoves, yeah, that use less fuel, that help, you know, to preserve our forest. We also have products like, for example, biogas systems for our customers. We have solar lighting solutions, and now solar for productive use again amongst our clients. That in the very remote places where people are using diesel and paraffin and all that, they stop using that. So we have products that again, internally again, we are really promoting, so that again, we take care of our environment. But again, in terms of mitigation, again, there's a lot that also happens supporting our customers. For example, for Juhudi Kilimo, in training them in smart agriculture, yeah, which again is a huge investment. That because we are a financial institution, now we need to really get ways of supporting our customers in doing smart agriculture. You know, agriculture that is quite resilient to climate change, and to see how they can cope, or they can mitigate, adapt to the climate change. We also give them, again, equipment for irrigation, including solar water pumps. So we do all these to ensure that, again, we are supporting the issue of sustainability and the environment. Yeah.
Okay. Is there one burning question, short question in the audience that somebody wants to get rid of and would like to answer? Okay, no burning issues. Then maybe I would like to quote, or to share two quotes of our member Brack, who was initially supposed to maybe join the panel as a second voice from the south that I wanted to share as maybe the closing words of that. And it summarizes a bit what we heard already from your side. A lot of more funding is needed for resilience and adaptation. While mitigation efforts focusing on reducing adverse impacts remain important, there needs to be greater recognition that the risks to the life and livelihoods of low-income communities in the global south are much higher than their impact on carbon emissions, which is negligible. And second, note that Barak sent to us, reporting requirements should be proportional, impactful, and not tick box exercises, putting organizations that serve and finance low-income communities in the global south under top-down regulation, focusing on greenhouse gas emission mitigation, is not only disproportional, but can also be detrimental. It takes time and resources away from the organizations which could be better channeled towards resilience and adaptation efforts. I thought those words express very well the challenge that I think we have, and that we all keep in mind. And with that, I would ask you to please give a big thank you and applause to our panelists. Thanks, Laura. Thanks, Emmanuel. Thanks, David, also for coming here, sharing your views. And we are very happy. I think this is a starting point of exchange and communication. As you said, the idea is not to be sitting here. Let's go up. Let's learn together. It's a joint learning. I think the intentions are right. And we are learning by doing. And that's what we do as an industry, as a network. I'm very happy we have started that communication across the different aspects of our industry. Thank you very much. And with that, I pass the word to Lucia, the chairwoman of the European Microfinance Platform, for her final address. Please, Lucia.
So I'm standing between you and the wine. And so I'm very careful and be very brief, but I hope you learned and got inspired as much as I did. If not, recordings will be available very soon. I look forward to next year's topic of the European Microfinance Award 2024, Financial Inclusion for Refugees and Forcibly Displaced People. We cannot reduce their number. Their number will unfortunately increase, affecting women and smallholder farmers disproportionately even more. But what we can do is what we do best, provide inclusive financial services to make them more resilient. Before looking forward to learning more on this topic next year, I hope I'll meet you in Bergamo, a beautiful city in the north of Italy, where towards the end of June 2024, the research conference will take place, hosted by the Bergamo University. And even in the shorter term, I would like to encourage you to fill out the feedback form that you can receive on your email shortly and on a QR code, which will appear in few moments. None of this could have been possible without the Luxembourg Ministry of Foreign and European Affairs, the sponsors, the speakers, the attendees in person, online, the fantastic European Microfinance Platform team, as well as our hosts, the Abbey team, as well as Charles and the great Good Vibes team. Join me in thanking them.